Imagine a battlefield in the 9th century. The clash of shields echoes through the air, and among the warriors, one figure stands out, a woman, armed and ready to fight. She is a shield maiden, a Viking warrior who defied all expectations of her time. But who were these women, and why has their story been erased throughout the centuries? In Viking society, renowned for its strength and expansion, women were not confined to their homes. They could be leaders, merchants, and even warriors. The Shieldmaidens, known as the Maidens of the Shield, were women who fought alongside men in battle, displaying courage and skill that rivaled any warrior. Today, we will unravel the story of these extraordinary women and understand their role in Viking culture. Picture this: while most medieval societies restricted women to domestic life, Viking women were breaking boundaries. These fierce warriors trained in the art of combat from a young age, mastering the sword, shield, and bow. They earned their place not through birthright, but through skill and determination. Some even commanded their own crews and led raids across the seas. You might wonder how we know these women existed. Well, in the ancient burial grounds of Birka, Sweden, archaeologists discovered something remarkable. A warrior's grave filled with weapons, shields, and 2 sacrificed horses belonged not to a man, but to a woman. This high-ranking warrior was buried with all the honors typically reserved for male commanders. The tales of these brave women have echoed through time, inspiring countless stories and legends. From the mighty Lagertha, whose prowess in battle earned her fame across the Norse lands, to the valiant Brynhilda, whose story of strength and defiance still captivates us today. If you love history and want to uncover the mysteries of great empires, like this video, subscribe to the Medieval Archives and don't miss a single episode. Join us as we journey through time to discover the untold stories of these remarkable women warriors who changed the course of history. Together, we'll explore how these shield maidens shattered the expectations of their time and left a legacy that continues to inspire us today. So are you ready to discover the true story of the Viking warrior women? Let's begin this extraordinary journey into the past. The origins of the shield maidens trace back to a time when the northern winds carried tales of extraordinary warriors across the fjords. These stories weren't just whispered around hearthfires, they were immortalized in the Norse Sagas, epic tales that chronicled the lives and deeds of the Viking people. In these ancient manuscripts, we find vivid descriptions of women warriors like Lagertha and Brynhilda, who fought with such skill and ferocity that their names became legend. Lagertha, described in Saxo Grammaticus's work from the 12th century, was said to have fought in the shield wall with her long hair flowing, striking fear into the hearts of her enemies. Brynhilda, another legendary figure, was so renowned for her combat prowess that it was said she could only be won in marriage by a man who could match her in battle. But were these tales merely flights of fancy, crafted to entertain during the long northern winters? The answer lies beneath the earth itself. Across Scandinavia, archaeologists have uncovered compelling evidence that suggests these warrior women were very real. In the lands of modern-day Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, they found women's graves containing shields, swords, spears, and other weapons of war. These weren't just ceremonial items. Wear patterns on the weapons suggest they saw real combat. One of the most fascinating discoveries came from the trading town of Birka, in what we now call Sweden. There, archaeologists unearthed the tomb of a high-ranking warrior. The grave contained a full set of weapons, including a sword, axe, spear, battle knife, and 2 shields. Nearby lay the remains of 2 sacrificed horses, a burial fitting for a great military leader. For years, everyone assumed this was the grave of a male warrior. It wasn't until modern DNA analysis revealed the truth. This renowned fighter was a woman. The Norse people kept detailed historical records, known as the Sagas, but they didn't write them down until hundreds of years after the events they described. Before that, these stories were passed down orally from generation to generation. This means that the tales of shield maidens were considered important enough to be preserved through centuries of storytelling. What's particularly interesting is how these women were portrayed in the sagas. They weren't depicted as anomalies or outcasts, but as respected members of Viking society. The sagas describe them training alongside men, leading raids, and commanding respect through their skill at arms. This suggests that while female warriors may not have been common, they were accepted and even celebrated in Viking culture. The term shield maiden itself tells us something about their role in society. In the Old Norse language, they were called skjaldmer, literally meaning shield maiden. This wasn't just a poetic term, it described their primary fighting style, wielding shield and sword in the famous Viking shield wall, where warriors would lock their shields together to form a nearly impenetrable barrier against enemy attacks. These women were breaking boundaries in a time when most of Europe relegated women to domestic roles. While the women of Paris or London were confined to households and convents, the women of the north were free to choose a warrior's path, if they were brave enough and skilled enough to walk it. The archaeological evidence, combined with the written accounts, paints a picture of a society where women could transcend traditional gender roles through their own merit and determination. The shield maidens weren't just characters in stories. They were real women who chose to take up arms and fight alongside their male counterparts, carving their names into history with the edge of a sword. Life as a shield maiden was far from the romantic tales we often hear today. From the moment a young girl chose the warrior's path, her life became an endless pursuit of martial excellence. While other children might have been learning household crafts, these future warriors were already learning the basics of combat. Their training began as early as age 8 or 9, starting with wooden weapons and progressing to real steel as they proved their skill. They learned to wield the sword, the most prestigious of Viking weapons, but that was just the beginning. The shield, despite seeming defensive, was actually a weapon in its own right. These women learned to use its edge to strike, its face to bash, and its weight to unbalance opponents. They also mastered the spear, axe, and bow, each weapon requiring years of dedicated practice to master. But combat training wasn't just about weapons. These women had to build incredible physical strength and endurance. They learned to fight wearing chainmail that could weigh up to 40 pounds, to move swiftly despite carrying shields made of heavy oak, and to maintain their balance on the swaying deck of a longship during naval battles. They trained in all weather conditions, in the biting cold of Nordic winters, through driving rain, and in the endless days of summer. What many people don't realize is that shield maidens were also tactical commanders. They studied strategy, learning to read the battlefield and make split-second decisions that could mean the difference between victory and defeat. They needed to understand the intricacies of the shield wall, the favorite Viking formation where warriors would lock their shields together to create a nearly impenetrable barrier. They learned when to hold the line and when to break formation for a decisive charge. Here's something fascinating. Archaeologists have found evidence that these women warriors weren't just fighting alongside men, they were leading them. In 2017, researchers made an extraordinary discovery in Birka, Sweden. They found the tomb of a high-ranking warrior, buried with full military honors, weapons, tactical gaming pieces used for planning battles, and even 2 sacrificed horses. For years, everyone assumed this was a male warrior, but DNA analysis revealed this military commander was actually a woman. The gaming pieces found in her grave were particularly significant. These weren't just toys, but sophisticated tools used by military commanders to plan battle strategies. The life of a shield maiden also included maintaining their equipment. They needed to know how to repair their chainmail, sharpen their weapons, and care for their leather armor. They learned which woods made the best shields and how to repair them after battle. Many became skilled blacksmiths, understanding that a warrior who couldn't maintain her own weapons was at the mercy of others. These women also had to master the art of intimidation. Vikings believed that battle was as much about psychological warfare as physical combat. Shieldmaidens would often go into battle with their hair flowing free, their shields painted with fearsome designs, and their voices raised in battle cries that would strike terror into their enemies' hearts. But perhaps most importantly, Shieldmaidens had to prove themselves constantly. In a society that valued strength and skill above all, they had to demonstrate again and again that they deserved their place in the shield wall. They did this not just through physical prowess, but through cunning, strategy, and an unshakable determination that earned them the respect of their male counterparts. The archaeological evidence tells us these women weren't just fighting in small skirmishes. They were participating in major battles. Their bones show the same pattern of injuries as male warriors: sword cuts, arrow wounds, and the distinctive marks left by violent combat. These weren't women playing at being warriors. They were hardened fighters who lived and died by the sword. This harsh but empowering life path shows us that Viking society had a remarkable understanding of capability over gender. While the rest of medieval Europe was restricting women to domestic roles, the Norse people recognized that courage, strength, and military genius could come in any form. The life of a shield maiden wasn't easy, but it offered something precious: the freedom to choose one's own path, to prove one's worth through skill and courage, and to earn a place in history through deeds rather than birth. Among all the shield maidens whose names echo through history, none shines quite as brightly as Lagertha. Her story, preserved in the writings of Saxo Grammaticus in his work Gesta Danorum, or Deeds of the Danes, written in the 12th century, tells of a warrior woman whose prowess in battle was matched only by her wisdom as a leader. The tale begins when Lagertha first met the legendary Viking hero Ragnar Lothbrok. At the time, Ragnar was fighting a civil war in Norway, and word reached him of a Norwegian king who had been killed, leaving his women unprotected. But when Ragnar's men arrived, expecting to find helpless maidens, they instead encountered something extraordinary. A group of women warriors, led by Lagertha, fighting with such skill and ferocity that they turned the tide of battle. Saxo describes Lagertha as a warrior who fought with her long hair flowing freely, moving through the battlefield like a dance of death. He writes that she was so skilled with sword and shield that other warriors would stop to watch her fight, amazed by her grace and deadly precision. But what truly set her apart was her tactical mind. She didn't just fight battles, she won them through clever strategy and bold leadership. The Sagas tell us that Ragnar was so impressed by Lagertha's fighting skills that he couldn't get her out of his mind. He began courting her, but Lagertha wasn't about to make it easy for the famous warrior. According to the story, she set a unique challenge. She placed a bear and a huge hound to guard her home. Ragnar had to defeat these beasts to prove himself worthy of her attention. With his sword, he slew the bear and strangled the hound, earning not just Lagertha's hand in marriage, but her respect as a warrior equal to herself. Together, Lagertha and Ragnar became one of the most powerful couples in Viking history. But here's what makes Lagertha's story truly remarkable. She never lost her independence. When Ragnar later sought to divorce her, Lagertha didn't fade into obscurity. Instead, she continued to lead armies and rule territory in her own right. In one famous incident, when Ragnar was facing defeat in a crucial battle, it was Lagertha who came to his aid with 100 ships, turning certain defeat into victory. What's particularly fascinating about Lagertha's story is how it differs from typical medieval tales about women. She isn't portrayed as someone's prize to be won or a passive character in someone else's story. She's a fully realized character with her own agency, making decisions based on her own judgment and leading armies through her own authority. The sagas describe her as not just beautiful, but specifically note her masculine mind and masculine courage, showing how Viking society valued these traits regardless of gender. This wasn't seen as contradictory. In fact, it was celebrated. Lagertha was admired for being both a fierce warrior and a clever ruler, showing that Viking women could embody multiple forms of power. Her story has resonated through the centuries because it speaks to something timeless, the idea that true strength knows no gender. Lagertha wasn't just fighting alongside men, she was leading them, commanding them, and often outdoing them in both combat and strategy. She became a ruler in her own right, governing her territories with the same skill she showed on the battlefield. Even after her time with Ragnar, the sagas tell us that Lagertha continued to shape Norse history. She ruled her own lands, led her own armies, and made her own decisions. There's even a story of how she killed her second husband with a spear she had hidden in her dress when he became too controlling, showing that she would never allow anyone to diminish her power or independence. While historians debate how much of Lagertha's story is historical fact and how much is legend, her impact on Viking culture is undeniable. She became the model of what a shield maiden could be, not just a warrior, but a leader, a strategist, and a ruler in her own right. Her story reminds us that in Viking society, women could rise to the highest levels of power through their own merit, courage, and skill. The legend of Lagertha continues to inspire people today, showing us that the Vikings were far ahead of their time in recognizing that leadership and warrior spirit aren't limited by gender. Her story isn't just about fighting prowess. It's about the power to shape one's own destiny, to lead others through strength of character, and to leave a legacy that would echo through the centuries. So, did you know that shield maidens were recognized as military leaders? If you're enjoying this video, like, share, and subscribe to the Medieval Archives channel for more amazing stories. And tell us in the comments, have you ever heard of shield maidens before? The legacy of the shield maidens extends far beyond the misty fjords of ancient Scandinavia. These warrior women, who fought and led with such distinction, have left an indelible mark on our cultural imagination that continues to resonate more than 1,000 years later. Today, we see their influence everywhere in popular culture. The hit series Vikings brought the story of Lagertha to millions of viewers worldwide, while countless books, video games, and films draw inspiration from these fierce Nordic warriors. But their true legacy runs much deeper than entertainment. It challenges our assumptions about gender roles throughout history. What's remarkable is how the shield maidens were ahead of their time. While medieval Europe was restricting women to domestic roles, Viking society had already recognized that warrior spirit and leadership abilities weren't limited by gender. This progressive outlook wouldn't be widely embraced again until modern times, making the Viking Age seem surprisingly forward-thinking in its treatment of women warriors. The archaeological evidence of these women continues to reshape our understanding of history. When archaeologists discovered the Birka warrior's tomb, it forced scholars to re-evaluate their assumptions about gender roles in Viking society. This high-ranking female warrior, buried with full military honors, weapons, and tactical equipment, proved that women could indeed reach the highest levels of military command in Viking culture. Modern military organizations have drawn inspiration from the shield maiden legacy. Norway became one of the first NATO countries to allow women in all combat roles, including their special forces, drawing a direct line from their Viking ancestors to modern military equality. The Norwegian Armed Forces even named one of their training programs Project Lagertha in honor of the legendary shield maiden. These warrior women have also become powerful symbols in the ongoing fight for gender equality. They remind us that there were times and places in history where women could break free from traditional roles and prove themselves through their own merit. The shield maidens show us that strength, courage, and leadership have never been exclusively male traits. In the world of sports and competition, Female athletes and fighters often draw inspiration from the shield maiden tradition. From mixed martial arts to traditional Viking sports revivals, women cite these ancient warriors as proof that female warriors have always existed and excelled in combat roles. Perhaps most importantly, the legacy of the shield maidens offers an alternative view of history. They show us that the past wasn't always as rigidly gender-divided as we might assume. In Viking society, a woman could choose to take up arms, lead raids, command ships, and earn respect through her deeds rather than her gender. This knowledge challenges us to question our assumptions about historical gender roles and imagine different possibilities for the future. The story of the Shield Maidens continues to inspire new generations. Young women and girls learning about these fierce warriors discover role models who proved that courage, strength, and leadership know no gender. Their legacy teaches us that barriers are meant to be broken, that tradition should never limit potential, and that true strength comes in many forms. In our modern world, where battles for equality are still being fought, the Shield Maidens remind us that women have always been capable of extraordinary achievements when given the opportunity. Their legacy isn't just about fighting with swords and shields, it's about the courage to defy expectations, the strength to forge your own path, and the wisdom to lead others toward positive change. The Shield Maidens may have wielded their swords more than a millennium ago, but their spirit lives on in every woman who dares to challenge conventions, break barriers, and fight for her place in the world. Their legacy isn't just history. It's a continuing source of inspiration for those who believe that courage and capability know no bounds. From the battlefield to the boardroom, from the sports arena to the scientific laboratory, the spirit of the Shield Maidens lives on in women who continue to break new ground and redefine what's possible. Their story reminds us that change is possible, that barriers can be broken, and that the most powerful legacy we can leave is the courage to be ourselves, regardless of society's expectations. As we reach the end of our journey through the epic tale of the Shield Maidens, we're left with a powerful reminder: courage, strength, and leadership have never been bound by gender. These remarkable women warriors, though often overlooked by mainstream history, left an indelible mark on the world that continues to resonate today. The Shield Maidens shattered the expectations of their time, proving that women could be just as fierce, just as skilled, and just as respected as any male warrior. They weren't content to accept the limitations others tried to place on them. Instead, they picked up their swords, raised their shields, and carved their own path through history. Think about it. While most of medieval Europe was telling women they couldn't even own property, Viking women were commanding ships, leading raids, and earning their place in history through the strength of their sword arms and the wisdom of their tactical minds. They weren't asking for permission to be warriors. They were proving their worth through their actions. Their legacy challenges us to question what other stories might be waiting to be uncovered. How many other women warriors, leaders, and pioneers have been written out of our history books? What tales of female courage and achievement are still waiting to be told? The story of the Shield Maidens reminds us that history isn't always what we assume it to be, and that sometimes the most extraordinary stories are the ones that have been hidden from view. As we look to the future, we might ask ourselves, what modern-day Shield Maidens are fighting battles in their own ways? Who are the women breaking barriers, challenging norms, and paving the way for future generations? Perhaps the spirit of the Shield Maidens lives on in every person who dares to defy expectations and forge their own path. If you've enjoyed this journey into the world of these extraordinary Viking warriors, I invite you to join us for more fascinating stories from history. Subscribe to the Medieval Archives, where we uncover the hidden tales and forgotten heroes of the past. Hit that like button if you've learned something new about these remarkable women warriors, and share this video with someone who might be inspired by their story. And remember, history is full of surprising tales waiting to be discovered. What ancient mystery should we explore next? Let us know in the comments below. Until our next historical adventure, keep the spirit of the Shieldmaidens alive. Be brave, be strong, and never let anyone tell you what you can't achieve. Thank you for joining us on this journey through time. Keep watching the medieval archives for more incredible stories from the ancient world. Until next time, may you find the courage of a shield maiden in your own battles, whatever they may be.